MacDougal here. I just recently watched Misery again, so I came up with a concept while watching it. Top 5 reasons to love it or hate it. Here we go. If you don't know Misery, it's one of a kind movie, so there's no name like Misery. It follows a rider who happens to drive a muscle car on a bad wintry day with a slightless care if he dies. But what do you know? He ends up in a nursing home with an escaped middle fan of his. Number 1. Paul Sheldon. Paul Sheldon has to be the best part of this movie. It has to do with the fact that he's played by James Caan, the guy who didn't pay when he went through the pay toll in The Godfather, and they shot him because he didn't have 35 cents. His acting with Kathy Bates makes a real good hero versus villain duo. So I said before, he's a writer who has these series of books with his main character, Misery Chastain. Paul is tired of writing about her and wants to move on to bigger and manlier things, but his publisher gives him his balls back, and that's when he really kills off Misery. The reason I like Paul so much is because I can relate to him, not by his writing, but by his actions he takes. He's weak in the beginning, but then he takes the manuscript of his new book and shoves it down Annie's hole. To me, that's a powerful metaphor for life. Number 2, Annie Wilkes. I know a lot of people would say she's the best part of this movie, but you're wrong. She is this movie. When I watched this for the first time, underground, trapped with 2 homeless men, I thought for sure she was going to say she's Misery. It's almost like a metaphor for how desperate a woman she is wanting to be like this character. She has Paul trapped in her bed where she keeps the Oreos. She views him like some god wanting to give her more life. To me, that's the power that drives this movie forward. It would just be boring if Paul and his thoughts were one about if he should have taken the Mustang or the 4-wheel drive. I love the part where she takes the hammer and bashes his legs and says the word, "God, I love you," like she was actually talking to her god, Paul Sheldon. Number 3, Rob Reiner. Number 3, Rob Reiner, the third best thing about this film. He directed another Stephen King classic, Stand By Me. It was actually King's choice to let him adapt this after Stand By Me. Most of the film takes place in a small room, and he uses that to his advantage to make it more claustrophobic to the point where we meet the characters' eye lines. I think the best suspenseful scene is when Paul complains about his typewriter being too black to Annie and has to get another one. She complains because it was the most expensive one she got. So they had a Seinfeld moment. She left Kramer style in her 4-wheel drive truck she borrowed off of Paul. The music tenses up and Paul rushes to the door using his bobby pin. We get to see the rest of her house in his level. I like this part because it uses her backstory in a subtle way without explaining things. I feel like if you get Brett Ratner, he'll just shove in exposition down your throat before you can eat your popcorn. There's also tension set up where Paul bumps in her Twinkie off the table and it pays off later. Number 4, Sheriff Buster. I know what you're thinking. Is this all going to be the characters? Well, if you see Misery, there's not much to the story but the characters, but I really want to talk about this one in particular. In every serial type of killer movie, there's always the main guy and his gal investigating, then you have the detective. It's usually always filler, and most of those characters are throwaways. I always call them shoehorns because they shoehorn it in, probably to tell the audience something that the main character doesn't. But the main thing, I always don't like them because they always get it right before the main character does. Sheriff Buster doesn't get a lead, but it turns out to be a bust in the gut. And I like the duo he and his wife have, that they can't be lovers while on duty. I don't think it adds much, but it shows a different point of view of Paul's life and how his books affect him as a writer. Number 5, the writing. Out of everything I've mentioned follows under the writing. I love coming back to this movie and listening to the old quotes I used to say all the time to random strangers in alleyways. Misery's alive. Misery's alive. Oh, this whole house is going to be full of romance. Oh, I'm going to put on my Deliverance records. Somehow it doesn't come off as cliche or bad, but clever. The best is between Paul and Annie. The screenplay was written by a god himself, William Goldman.
And a writer, I'd never come across anyone like Annie.
And then on stage, what you're stuck with is he's on stage 90% of the time, so you have to reframe the story back to being about what is it like in this room with this man.
Almost done.
Who also written another favorite of mine, The Princess Bride. Those are my 5 reasons to love it or hate it. What did you think? Did you love it or did you hate it? I'm MacDougal. As always, happy millennium.
God, I love you.